They ignored me when I came empty-handed. They ignored me again when I brought everything. I stood in the doorway of my sister's dining room, arms laden with dishes I'd spent 3 days preparing. Watching my family laugh at jokes I couldn't hear from the kitchen. The same family who had turned their backs when I'd arrived last Christmas with nothing but apologies and empty hands. Fresh from losing my job, my apartment, my dignity scattered like breadcrumbs behind me. Now I had everything. The promotion, the new house, the carefully curated life that looked perfect from the outside. And still, they looked through me like I was made of glass. "Oh, Sarah's here," my mother announced without looking up from her wine glass. "Did you remember to bring something this time?" The words hit like a slap, even though I'd expected them, even though I'd prepared for them. My arms ached from carrying the turkey I'd brined for 2 days, the stuffing made from scratch with chestnuts I'd roasted myself, the cranberry sauce that had taken 4 attempts to get right. Behind me, my car held 3 more trips worth of food, enough to feed twice the people gathered here. "I brought a few things," I said quietly, setting the turkey on the counter that my sister Emma had pointedly left empty for me, as if she'd known I'd need the space, but couldn't bring herself to acknowledge it. Emma glanced at the spread I was unpacking, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to go overboard, Sarah. We already ordered catering." The words sat in my chest like a stone. I looked at the dining room table, set for 12, already groaning under the weight of professionally arranged platters, elegant, effortless, everything I'd tried so hard not to be. "Of course you did," I whispered, more to myself than to her. My nephew Tyler, now 16 and taller than I remembered, wandered into the kitchen. He paused when he saw me, something flickering across his face that might have been recognition, might have been pity. "Aunt Sarah, you made all this." I nodded, suddenly feeling foolish. The kitchen looked like a battlefield, my homemade dishes crowding the counter space, looking rustic and amateur, next to the catered perfection already claiming the table. "It smells incredible," he said, and for a moment I felt something warm unfurl in my chest. "Way better than that fancy stuff Mom ordered." Emma appeared behind him, her smile sharp as winter. "Tyler, go wash up. Dinner's almost ready." He hesitated, looking between us. "But Aunt Sarah just now, Tyler." He left, casting one last glance at my turkey, and I was alone again with my sister. The sister who used to call me when her marriage was falling apart. The sister who used to show up at my door at midnight, crying about how she felt invisible in her own life. The sister who had disappeared the moment I needed her to see me. "You know, Sarah," Emma said, wiping down a counter that was already clean, "you don't have to try so hard. We're family. We love you, regardless." The words should have been comfort. Instead, they felt like dismissal wrapped in silk. "I wanted to contribute," I said. "I wanted to what? Prove something?" Emma's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You don't need to prove anything to us." But I did. I needed to prove that I wasn't the broken woman who had shown up last year with nothing but excuses. I needed to prove that I could be worthy of the space I took up in this room. At this table, in this family that had learned to function perfectly well without me. Through the doorway, I could see my father carving the catered ham, my mother arranging store-bought rolls in a basket, my brother-in-law opening wine that costs more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. They moved around each other with practiced ease, a choreography I'd never learned, had never been invited to learn. "The turkey needs to rest anyway," I said finally, covering it with foil. "I'll just, put everything in the warming oven." Emma nodded, already turning away, already forgetting I was there. "That's fine. Whatever you think is best." I opened the warming oven and began transferring my dishes, each one a small defeat. The stuffing I'd tested 3 times. The green bean casserole with the crispy onions I'd made from scratch. The sweet potato soufflé that had taken me 6 hours to perfect. All of it disappearing into the warm darkness, invisible, unnecessary. From the dining room came the sound of chairs scraping, voices calling for everyone to gather. Thanksgiving was beginning, and I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by food no one would eat, love no one would taste. "Sarah," my mother called. Come sit down, everything's ready. I closed the warming oven door and smoothed my dress, the one I'd bought specifically for today. The one that cost more than I should have spent, but made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Walking toward the dining room, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked like a woman who had everything. I felt like a woman who had nothing at all. The table was beautiful. The catered food gleamed under the chandelier light, arranged with professional precision. My family sat in their assigned places, the same places they'd occupied for years, the same constellation of relationships that had formed and reformed around my absence. There was a chair for me, of course. At the end of the table, between my teenage nephew and my father, who was already deep in conversation with my brother-in-law about football scores. The chair that said I belonged here, even as everything else said I didn't. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap, watching my family serve themselves from platters I hadn't touched, listening to conversations that flowed around me like water around a stone. They weren't cruel. They weren't intentionally excluding me. They had simply learned to be a family without me, and my presence now felt like an interruption to their rhythm. "This ham is delicious," my mother said to Emma. "Where did you order from?" "That new place downtown," Emma replied. "They do everything, made Thanksgiving so much easier." Easier. The word echoed in my mind as I reached for the catered stuffing, bypassing the homemade version that sat cooling in the kitchen. Easier to order than to accept. Easier to maintain distance than to bridge it. Easier to ignore than to see. I took a bite of the professional stuffing, perfectly seasoned, expertly prepared, utterly forgettable, and wondered if this was what love looked like when it had learned to protect itself. Polite, careful, safe, and completely empty. After dinner, I retreated to the kitchen while the others settled into the living room with their wine and their easy laughter. The dishes needed washing, and I needed the familiar rhythm of hot water and soap, the simple task of making something clean. I stood at the sink, scrubbing plates that had held food I hadn't made, listening to the distant sound of my family's contentment. Through the window, the November sky was darkening early, threatening rain that matched the gray weight settling in my chest. "You don't have to do that." I turned to find Tyler in the doorway, holding 2 empty wine glasses. He'd grown so much in the years since I'd seen him, not just taller, but something in his eyes looked older, more aware. "I don't mind," I said, taking the glasses from him. "It gives me something to do." He leaned against the counter, watching me work. "Why didn't anyone eat your food?" The question hung in the air between us, honest and sharp. I'd been wondering the same thing, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that hurt. "They were full from the catered food," I said, scrubbing a plate harder than necessary. "It happens. That's not why." I looked at him. This boy who was becoming a man, who saw things the adults had learned to pretend they didn't see. "What do you mean?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment, picking at the edge of the counter. "Last year, after you left, I heard Mom and Grandma talking. They said you were going through a difficult phase and that they needed to manage expectations." The words hit me like cold water. Manage expectations. They were worried you'd ask for money again, or that you'd make a scene. Mom said it was easier to just ... keep things simple. I set down the plate I was washing, my hands suddenly shaking. "And this year they're worried you're trying too hard, that you're overcompensating." He looked up at me, his young face serious. "They think everything you brought was about guilt, not love." The honesty of it took my breath away. I gripped the edge of the sink, feeling the world tilt slightly off its axis. "And what do you think?" Tyler was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, I think you made that turkey because you love us. And I think they're too scared to let you." "Scared of what?" "Scared that if they let you back in, really back in, you might leave again." The truth of it settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had left, in a way. Not physically, but emotionally. When my life fell apart, when I lost my job and couldn't make rent, when I had to move back in with a college roommate at 35, I had pulled away from them. I had stopped calling, stopped showing up, stopped being present in their lives because I couldn't bear to be seen as the failure, the cautionary tale, the sister who couldn't get her life together, and they had learned to live without me. They had closed the gap I left behind, rearranged themselves into a new pattern that didn't include space for my chaos, my need, my complicated love. I never meant to leave, I whispered. I know, Tyler said. But you did, and now they don't know how to let you come back. Through the doorway, I could hear my father telling a story about his golf game, my mother's delighted laughter, Emma's voice adding commentary, the sound of a family that had learned to be whole without me. I opened the warming oven and pulled out my turkey, still golden, still perfect, still untouched. The smell filled the kitchen, herbs and butter, and the kind of love that takes time to create. I carved off a piece and handed it to Tyler on a small plate. He took a bite and his eyes widened. This is incredible, Aunt Sarah. This is the best turkey I've ever had. Better than the ham. So much better. He took another bite, savoring it. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell them to try it? I thought about that, watching him eat the food I'd made with such care, because I wanted them to choose it. I wanted them to want it. They're idiots, he said fiercely, and I almost smiled. They're scared, I corrected. There's a difference. The rain started then, pattering against the kitchen window, turning the world outside soft and gray. I pulled out the rest of my dishes, the stuffing, the cranberry sauce, the sweet potato souffle, and began making plates. Not for the adults in the living room, but for Tyler and me. A Thanksgiving dinner made of the food I'd brought, the love I'd offered, the effort they'd been too afraid to accept. We sat at the kitchen island, eating in comfortable silence while the rain grew heavier outside. The food was good, better than good. It was the taste of trying, of caring, of showing up even when you weren't sure you'd be welcomed. Will you teach me how to make this stuffing? Tyler asked between bites. You want to learn? Yeah. I'm going away to college next year, and I want to know how to make something that tastes like home. The words caught in my throat. Home. This boy, this almost man, thought my cooking tasted like home. Of course, I managed. We can start with the basics. How to make a good stock, how to season properly, how to trust your instincts. Cool. He grinned at me, and for a moment, he looked like the little boy I used to babysit, the one who would climb into my lap and ask me to read him stories about dragons and brave knights. From the living room came the sound of chairs moving, voices saying goodbye. The evening was ending, the family dispersing back to their separate lives. Soon, Emma would come into the kitchen and find us here, eating the food she'd dismissed, and I wondered what she'd say, what any of them would say. But for now, it was just Tyler and me sharing a meal made of second chances and quiet understanding. The rain continued to fall, washing the world clean outside the window. And I thought about how sometimes love looks like showing up with everything, even when you know it might not be wanted. Sometimes love looks like feeding the one person willing to be fed. Aunt Sarah, Tyler said, pushing his empty plate away. Yeah, next year, when I'm at college, will you send me care packages with homemade stuff like this? I looked at him, this boy who had grown up while I was learning how to fall apart and put myself back together, and felt something shift inside my chest, something that felt like hope. Every month, I promised, if you want them, I want them. Outside, car doors slammed as the first guests left. The evening was winding down, but something new was beginning, something small and fragile and real. I began packing up the leftover food. My food, the dishes that had gone untouched by everyone except the one person who mattered most. Tyler helped me, wrapping containers and labeling them, making sure I had enough to take home, enough to last through the week ahead. Take some to your dorm, friends, I said, handing him a container of stuffing. Share it. Are you sure? I'm sure. Food is meant to be shared. Love is meant to be shared. He hugged me then, quick and fierce, and I held on just a moment longer than necessary, breathing in the scent of his cologne and the lingering smell of the dinner we'd shared. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright. This was the best Thanksgiving I've had in years. Mine too, I said, and meant it. The kitchen was clean now, the dishes washed and put away. the evidence of my effort erased, except for the containers of food I'd be taking home. In the living room, the last of the guests were saying their goodbyes, and soon I'd have to join them, to smile and hug and pretend that everything was fine. But something had changed. Something small, but significant. I had been seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. I had been chosen, even if it was only by one person. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. I was loading the last container into my car when Emma appeared beside me, her arms wrapped around herself against the November chill. The rain had stopped, but the air still held the promise of more to come. "You're leaving already?" she asked, though we both knew the evening had run its natural course. "It's getting late," I said, closing the trunk on enough food to last me a week, "and I have an early meeting tomorrow." She nodded, but didn't move away from the car. In the porch light, she looked younger somehow, more like the sister I remembered from childhood, the one who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms, who used to practice her wedding vows with me as the pretend groom. "Sarah," she started, then stopped, looking down at her hands. "I saw you and Tyler eating in the kitchen." I waited, not sure if this was an accusation or an observation. "He said your turkey was the best he'd ever had." "He's a good kid," I said carefully. "You've raised him well. He's always been drawn to you," Emma said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. "Even when he was little, you were his favorite aunt. I'm his only aunt. You know what I mean?" I did know. I remembered the way Tyler used to light up when I walked into a room, the way he'd choose to sit next to me at family dinners, the way he'd ask me to read him bedtime stories when I stayed over. Before everything fell apart, before I became the sister who needed help instead of the one who gave it. "Emma," I said, leaning against my car, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, though her posture suggested she was bracing for impact. "Last year, when I came with nothing, were you embarrassed by me?" The question hung in the cold air between us. Emma was quiet for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes." The honesty of it was like a physical blow, but also a relief. Finally, someone was telling me the truth. "Not because of the money," she continued quickly. "Not because you were struggling, but because ... because you looked so defeated, so broken. And I didn't know how to help you, and that made me feel helpless. And I hate feeling helpless." I stared at her, this sister I thought I knew, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. "So you decided it was easier to keep me at arm's length." "I decided it was safer," she corrected. "For both of us. You were drowning, Sarah, and I was afraid that if I tried to pull you out, you'd pull me under with you." The metaphor hit too close to home. I had been drowning in debt and depression, and the kind of shame that makes you want to disappear entirely. And I had been reaching for anything solid, anyone who might throw me a lifeline. And tonight, I asked, when I came with everything. Emma's laugh was bitter. "Tonight, I was afraid you were trying to buy your way back in. That all this food, all this effort, was just another way of asking for something." Asking for what? Forgiveness? Acceptance? A place at the table? She looked at me directly for the first time since we'd started talking. "I was afraid that if we let you back in, if we acted like everything was fine, you'd think that meant we were okay with how you disappeared on us." The words hit me like a revelation. "I never disappeared on you." "Yes, you did." Emma's voice was firm now. "Sure, when things got bad, you stopped calling. You stopped showing up to things. You stopped being part of this family, and we had to learn how to be a family without you." "I was ashamed," I said, the words coming out raw and honest. I was 35 years old and sleeping on someone's couch. I couldn't even afford to bring a bottle of wine to dinner. How was I supposed to show up and pretend everything was fine? "You were supposed to show up anyway," Emma said, and her voice broke slightly. "You were supposed to trust us enough to let us see you broken." The truth of it settled over me like a weight. I had been so focused on protecting my pride, on not being a burden, that I had forgotten the most basic rule of family. You show up broken, you show up empty-handed, you show up when you have nothing to offer but your presence. I didn't know how, I whispered. I know, Emma said. And we didn't know how to tell you it was okay. We stood there in the cold. Two sisters who had spent a year circling each other like wounded animals, finally acknowledging the hurt we'd both been carrying. Tyler ate 3 helpings of your stuffing, Emma said suddenly. He's a growing boy. He also asked me for your recipe. I looked at her, surprised. What did you tell him? I told him to ask you himself. Emma smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd given me all evening. I also told him that his Aunt Sarah makes the best stuffing in the family, and that's not something you can learn from a recipe. Something warm unfurled in my chest. You said that? I said that. Emma stepped closer to my car, closer to me. Sarah, I need you to know something. When you walked in tonight with all that food, my first thought wasn't that you were trying too hard. My first thought was that I missed you. I missed having a sister who cared enough to spend 3 days cooking for us. The words broke something open inside me, something that had been locked tight for months. I missed you too, I said. I missed being someone worth cooking for. Emma reached out and touched my arm. The first physical contact we'd had all evening. You were always worth cooking for. We just forgot how to let you. From inside the house came the sound of Tyler calling for his mother, asking if she'd seen his phone charger. Normal family sounds, the kind I'd been listening to from the outside for too long. I should go, I said, but I didn't move toward the driver's door. Sarah, Emma said, and her voice was different now, softer. Next month, for Christmas. Would you want to cook with me? Not instead of catering, but in addition to it, together. The offer hung in the air between us, fragile and precious. You want me to help? I want you to come home, Emma said simply. Really, home. Not as a guest, not as someone we have to manage or protect or worry about. As my sister. I felt tears starting, the kind that come from relief as much as sadness. I'd like that. Good. Emma smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. Fair warning though, Tyler's going to want to help too. He's been asking to learn how to cook. I can teach him, I said. I'd love to teach him. I know you would. Emma stepped back, letting me open my car door. Drive safe, okay? And Sarah, yeah, next time, don't wait for an invitation. Just show up. With food, without food, whatever. Just show up. I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. I got into my car and started the engine, watching Emma wave from the porch as I pulled out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see the warm light spilling from her windows, the house that had felt so foreign to me just hours ago. The drive home was quiet, the roads empty, except for the occasional car carrying other people home from their own family gatherings. I thought about Tyler's request for care packages, about Emma's invitation to cook together, about the containers of food in my trunk that would feed me for days. When I got home to my small apartment, the one I'd been able to afford after getting back on my feet, the one that finally felt like mine, I unpacked the leftovers and put them in the refrigerator. Tomorrow, I'd eat my own cooking and remember the taste of being seen, of being chosen, of being welcomed back into the complicated, messy, beautiful thing called family. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Tyler's contact, typing a quick message. Thank you for eating dinner with me tonight. It meant more than you know. His response came back almost immediately. Thank you for making something worth eating. Can't wait for those care packages. I smiled, setting the phone aside and looking around my small kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And now, it was also the place where I'd learned that love doesn't always look like acceptance. Sometimes, love looks like showing up with everything you have, even when you're not sure it will be wanted. Sometimes love looks like one person willing to taste what you've made with your own hands. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love looks like a sister who finally remembers how to let you come home. 3 weeks later, I stood in Emma's kitchen at 6 in the morning, my arms full of grocery bags and my heart full of nervous energy. Christmas was still 2 days away, but we'd decided to start the cooking early, partly for practical reasons, but mostly because neither of us wanted to wait any longer to begin again. You're early, Emma said, opening the door in her pajamas and a robe, her hair still messy from sleep. I couldn't sleep, I admitted. I kept thinking about the menu. She laughed, stepping aside to let me in. You've been thinking about the menu for 3 weeks. I think we're covered. The kitchen looked different in the early morning light, softer somehow, more welcoming. Emma had cleared all the counter space for us, and I could see she'd already started coffee. The sight of 2 mugs waiting by the machine made something warm settle in my chest. Tyler's still asleep, Emma said, pouring coffee for both of us. But he made me promise to wake him when we start the stuffing. He's really serious about learning to cook. He's serious about learning from you, Emma corrected. There's a difference. I began unpacking the groceries, fresh herbs, good butter, the kind of ingredients that cost more but make all the difference. Emma watched me work, sipping her coffee and occasionally asking questions about what I'd planned. So, we're making 3 different stuffings, she asked, reading from the list I'd written out. Traditional sage, cornbread with chorizo, and wild rice with cranberries, I confirmed. Plus the turkey, obviously. And the sides we discussed. That's a lot of food for 12 people. It's Christmas, I said, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Emma was quiet for a moment, watching me arrange ingredients with the kind of precision that comes from years of cooking alone, of having only myself to please. Sarah, she said finally, can I ask you something? I looked up from the herbs I was sorting. Of course. When did you become such an amazing cook? I remember you burning mac and cheese in college. The question made me smile. Necessity, mostly. When things were bad, I couldn't afford to eat out. So I learned to make cheap ingredients taste good. Then, when I got back on my feet, I kept cooking because it was the one thing I could control, the one thing I could make perfect. Is that what this is about? Making things perfect. I considered the question, really considered it. No, I said finally. This is about making things with love. There's a difference. Emma nodded, and I could see her processing this, understanding something about me she hadn't before. Teach me, she said suddenly. Teach you what? How to cook like that? How to put love into food instead of just following a recipe? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd missed before. She was tired. Not just from staying up late preparing for Christmas, but tired in the way that comes from years of trying to make everything look effortless. Of ordering catering instead of risking failure, of choosing safety over connection. It starts with choosing the right ingredients, I said, picking up a bunch of fresh sage, not the most expensive, but the ones that speak to you, speak to me. Here, I held the sage out to her. Smell this. Emma leaned in and inhaled. It smells like Thanksgiving at Grandma's house. Exactly. That's how you know it's right. For the next hour, we worked side by side. And I taught Emma what I'd learned in my small apartment kitchen during those long months of rebuilding my life. How to taste as you go, how to trust your instincts, how to cook with your hands, not just your eyes. The secret to good stuffing, I said, showing her how to tear the bread into irregular pieces, is texture. You want some pieces that will dissolve into the stock, and some that will stay firm and give you something to bite into. Emma tried it. Her movements awkward at first, then gaining confidence, like this. Perfect. Now, when you saute the onions, you want them soft, but not brown. You're building flavor layer by layer. We were deep in the rhythm of cooking when Tyler appeared in the doorway, drawn by the smell of butter and herbs. Is it stuffing time? He asked, his voice still thick with sleep. It's stuffing time, I confirmed, making room for him at the counter. What followed was one of the most beautiful mornings I'd experienced in years. The 3 of us worked together, Tyler asking endless questions, Emma laughing when she accidentally oversalted the cornbread mixture, me feeling useful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Why do you add the stock slowly? Tyler asked, watching me ladle warm broth into the bread mixture. Because you want the bread to absorb it gradually, I explained. If you dump it all in at once, you get soup instead of stuffing. It's like trust, Emma said suddenly, and we both looked at her. You have to add it slowly, let it absorb, make sure it's ready for more. The metaphor hung in the air between us, and I realized she wasn't just talking about cooking anymore. "Yeah," I said softly. "Exactly like trust." By noon, the kitchen smelled like Christmas morning and childhood memories. We'd made enough food to feed an army, but more importantly, we'd made something together, something that tasted like forgiveness and second chances, and the particular kind of love that can only be built through shared work. "I need to tell you something," Emma said as we were cleaning up. Tyler had gone to shower, and we were alone again in the kitchen that now felt like ours, instead of just hers. "Okay. I called Mom this morning. Before you got here, I told her about what we were doing today, about how we were cooking together." I felt my stomach tighten. "What did she say?" "She said she was glad. She said she'd been worried about both of us, you for being so isolated, and me for being so ... controlled." Emma dried her hands on a dish towel, not meeting my eyes. "She also said she owed you an apology." "For what? For Thanksgiving? For not trying your food? For treating you like a guest in your own family?" The words hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd thought I was over Thanksgiving, that Tyler's acceptance had been enough. But hearing that my mother had noticed, had regretted her behavior, opened something in me I didn't know was still closed. "She wants to come early on Christmas," Emma continued, "to help with the final preparations, to learn some of your recipes." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard correctly. "Mom wants to learn my recipes. She said she realized she doesn't know how to cook anymore. That she's been ordering and buying and arranging for so long, she's forgotten how to actually make something with her own hands." Emma finally looked at me. "She wants you to teach her." The idea of my mother, who had always seemed so competent, so put together, asking me to teach her anything was almost incomprehensible. But it was also exactly what I'd been hoping for without knowing it. "I'd like that," I said. "Good," because I already told her yes. We finished cleaning in comfortable silence. The kitchen restored to order, but somehow transformed. It felt like our space now, a place where we'd built something together, where we'd remembered how to be sisters. "Sarah," Emma said as I was gathering my things to leave, "I have something for you." She disappeared into the dining room and came back with a small wrapped box. "It's not much," she said, handing it to me. "And it's not Christmas yet, but I wanted you to have it now." I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small wooden recipe box, old and worn, with my grandmother's initials carved into the lid. "This was Grandma's," Emma said. "Mom gave it to me when she died, but I think it should be yours. You're the one who actually cooks." I opened the box and found it full of index cards, covered in my grandmother's careful handwriting, recipes for all the dishes I remembered from childhood, the ones that had made her kitchen feel like the center of the world. "Emma," I whispered, running my fingers over the familiar handwriting. "There's something else," she said, pulling out a blank index card. "I want you to write down your stuffing recipe. All 3 versions. For the box." I looked at her, this sister who was learning to let me back in, who was learning to trust that I wouldn't disappear again. "I will," I promised. "But only if you write down your own recipes too. The ones you're going to create." "I don't have any recipes." "You will," I said, thinking of the way she'd touched the sage, the way she'd understood about adding trust slowly. "You're going to learn to cook with love, and then you're going to have recipes worth sharing." Emma smiled, and I could see the future in that smile. Christmas mornings spent cooking together, Tyler learning to make care packages for his college friends, my mother rediscovering the joy of making something with her own hands. A family that had learned to nourish each other, literally and figuratively. I hugged my sister goodbye, holding the recipe box against my chest like the treasure it was. As I drove home, I thought about the recipes I'd write down, not just the ingredients and measurements, but the stories behind them, the love that had gone into perfecting them, the hope that had sustained me through all those months of cooking for one. Tomorrow, my mother would come early to learn. Christmas Day, we'd feed our family food made with our own hands. And someday, Tyler would make these same dishes in his own kitchen. For his own family, carrying forward the recipes and the love they contained. Some things, I realized, are worth the wait. Christmas morning arrived soft and gray, with snow falling gently outside Emma's windows like a benediction. I stood in her kitchen at dawn, watching the world turn white. My grandmother's recipe box opened beside me as I made the final preparations for our feast. My mother had come early, as promised, arriving the day before with an eagerness I hadn't seen in her for years. She'd stood in this same kitchen asking questions about seasoning and technique. Her hands awkward but willing as I taught her to make gravy from scratch. "I used to know how to do this," she'd said, whisking the roux with careful concentration. "Before your father's practice took off, before we could afford to have everything catered, I used to cook for you girls." I remember, I'd told her, and I did vague memories of her in our childhood kitchen. Flour in her hair, the smell of something wonderful in the oven. "I want to remember again," she'd said simply, and something in my chest had loosened, some knot I'd been carrying for longer than I realized. Now, as I basted the turkey one final time, I could hear the house waking up around me. Tyler's voice calling down the stairs, Emma's laughter from the living room, my father's familiar grumble about the coffee being too weak. The sounds of a family gathering, the sounds I'd been listening to from the outside for too long. Something smells incredible in here. I turned to find my mother in the doorway, already dressed for the day, her hair done but her sleeves rolled up in a way that suggested she was ready to work. "The turkey's almost done," I said, "and the stuffings are staying warm. All three kinds. All three kinds." She moved to stand beside me at the stove, where I was stirring the cranberry sauce, not the canned kind, but the one made with fresh berries and orange zest, the one that took patience and attention. "Can I help with anything?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. This was my mother asking to be useful in my kitchen, asking to learn from me instead of the other way around. "You can help me plate," I said. "If you want, I want." We worked together in comfortable silence, arranging food on platters with care, making everything beautiful, not for show, but for love. My mother's movements were tentative at first, then gaining confidence as she remembered the rhythm of serving, of making something special for people you care about. "Sarah," she said, as we were transferring the stuffings to serving bowls, "I owe you an apology." I looked up from the wild rice mixture I was spooning carefully into my grandmother's good china. "For Thanksgiving," she continued, "for not trying what you'd made, for treating you like you were still the broken version of yourself instead of seeing who you'd become." The words hung in the warm air between us, honest and necessary. "I was afraid," she continued, "that if I acknowledged how much effort you'd put in, how much love you'd poured into that food, I'd have to acknowledge how much I'd missed you. How much we'd all missed you." "Mom," I started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I spent so much time trying to protect this family from disappointment, yours, ours, everyone's, that I forgot the most important thing. Family isn't about protection. It's about showing up for each other even when it's messy, even when it's hard." I set down the spoon I was holding and really looked at my mother. She was smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but there was something new in her eyes, a willingness to be vulnerable that I'd never seen before. "I missed you too," I said simply. "I know you did, and I'm sorry it took me so long to let you come home." From the dining room came the sound of chairs being arranged, voices calling for everyone to gather. Our family was assembling, ready for the feast we'd prepared together. "Are you ready for this?" my mother asked, gesturing toward the platters of food we'd arranged. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it. We carried the food out together, my mother and I setting it on the table that Emma had decorated with candles and evergreen branches. The table looked beautiful, but more than that, it looked loved. It looked like a place where people belonged. Tyler appeared at my elbow as I was setting down the last platter. "Aunt Sarah, this looks amazing, like restaurant amazing." "Better than restaurant," I said, ruffling his hair. "This is made with love. Can I try the chorizo stuffing first?" "You can try whatever you want." The family gathered around the table, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I felt like I belonged here, at this table, with these people who had learned to love me again, not despite my brokenness, but because of how I'd put myself back together. My father said grace, his voice warm with gratitude, and then we began to eat. And this time, everyone tried everything. They passed the platters of food I'd made, they asked for seconds, they complimented the flavors, and asked about the recipes. This stuffing is incredible, my brother-in-law said, taking his third helping of the traditional sage version. What's your secret? No secret, I said. Just time and attention. And love, Tyler added, grinning at me. Aunt Sarah says the secret ingredient is always love. Tyler's right, Emma said, raising her wine glass. I want to make a toast. The table quieted, everyone turning to look at her. To Sarah, she said, for teaching us that the best gifts aren't the ones you buy. They're the ones you make with your own hands, with your own heart. To Sarah, the table echoed and I felt tears starting, the good kind, the kind that come from being seen and chosen and welcomed home. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Tyler pulled me aside. I have something for you, he said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a wooden spoon, old and worn, with a note attached. This was Great-Grandma's mom, said you should have it, since you're the one who really cooks now. I held the spoon, my great-grandmother's spoon, the one she'd used to stir countless pots of soup and sauce and love, and felt the weight of generations in my hands. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you, Tyler said, for coming back. For teaching me that food can be love, for showing me what it means to really take care of people. As the evening wound down and the family began to disperse, I stood in Emma's kitchen one last time, washing the dishes we'd used to create our feast. The kitchen was quiet now, but it felt full of laughter and conversation, and the lingering smell of a meal made with love. Emma appeared beside me with a dish towel, and we worked together in comfortable silence, sisters again in the truest sense. Same time next year, she asked as we finished the last of the dishes. Same time next year, I agreed. But maybe we start a new tradition. Maybe we cook together more than just holidays. I smiled, thinking of all the meals we could share, all the recipes we could create together, all the love we could pour into the simple act of feeding each other. I'd like that, I said. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely home.